In the dying light of the 41st millennium, there exists a truth more terrible than any Xenos invasion, more crushing than the weight of 10,000 years of war. The Emperor of mankind sits upon the golden throne, neither alive nor dead, a corpse that commands more devotion than any living god ever could. His withered form, sustained by the daily sacrifice of 1,000 souls, has become the cornerstone of the most vast and merciless faith machine ever conceived by human minds. The Imperial Church, the Ecclesiarchy, does not simply preach. It devours. It transforms hope into ash, doubt into heresy, and silence into complicity. This is not the gentle faith of ancient terror's forgotten religions, where believers might find solace in their devotion. This is faith as a weapon, belief sharpened to a blade that cuts both ways, slicing through the hearts of the faithful as surely as it destroys their enemies. The fire of imperial faith cannot die because it feeds on everything. Joy, sorrow, despair, even death itself becomes fuel for its eternal burning. In cathedral cities that stretch across continents, beneath Gothic spires that pierce the very atmosphere, billions kneel in endless supplication to a God who demands everything and promises only suffering in return. The paradox is complete. The more the faithful give, the more they must give. The more they suffer, the more righteous their suffering becomes. The Emperor's silence is not absence, it is the most terrible presence of all, for in his silence, the Church speaks with his voice, acts with his authority, and kills in his name. This is the Imperium's greatest horror, not that it worships a corpse, but that this worship has become so total, so consuming, that it has replaced reality itself. Faith is no longer belief, it is the only truth permitted to exist. But the machine of worship demands constant feeding, and in the shadows between prayers, something stirs that even the Church fears to name. The morning bells of Sanctus Prime ring out across habblocks that stretch beyond the horizon, their bronze tongues calling 40 billion souls to their daily genuflection. In the underhive, where recycled air carries the perpetual scent of incense and human sweat, families gather in chambers barely large enough for a man to stand upright. They recite the Litany of Dawn in voices hoarse from yesterday's devotions, words worn smooth by 10 millennia of repetition. The Emperor protects, they whisper, though protection seems a distant concept in these crushing depths where children are born already knowing the taste of industrial runoff and the ache of malnutrition. The prayer is not spoken in hope, it is carved into their very genetics, branded upon their souls before their first breath. Above them, in the middle spires, manufacturing workers pause at their assembly lines every 15 minutes to perform the ritual of blessed labor. Servo skulls drift overhead, recording their devotions with mechanical precision. A missed prayer means docked rations. A forgotten genuflection means a mark in the ledger of faith. Too many marks mean a visit from the confessors, and those visits rarely end in forgiveness. Higher still, in the cathedral spires where the air grows thin and pure, Cardinal Vex Mortifera leads the noble houses in the 7 hours of sacred contemplation. Here, prayer becomes performance, faith transformed into elaborate theater where the slightest deviation from ritual orthodoxy can mean excommunication, or worse. The cardinal's voice echoes through chambers lined with the bones of saints, each word measured, each syllable weighted with the authority of absolute truth. The bells never stop ringing on Sanctus Prime. When the morning devotions end, the afternoon prayers begin. When afternoon fades, evening litanies rise like smoke from a million censers. Night brings the whispered confessions, the secret penances, the private agonies offered up to the Emperor's endless hunger. Sleep itself becomes prayer on this world, for even dreams must be consecrated to the throne. Children are taught to recite the Canticle of Rest before closing their eyes, ensuring that even their unconscious minds serve the Emperor's will. Nightmares are not disturbances, they are visions of the Emperor's enemies, gifts that allow the faithful to hate more purely upon waking. The weight of this existence presses down upon every soul like the gravity of a dying star. There is no moment, no breath, no heartbeat that is not dedicated to the corpse god's glory. Faith has replaced air itself, and to breathe without praying is to suffocate on heresy. Yet this is not the crushing devotion of martyrs who choose their suffering. This is the systematic erosion of choice itself, the careful architecture of a society where faith is not embraced but absorbed, like poison seeping into groundwater. The Church has made worship so fundamental to human existence that to question it would be like questioning the need to breathe. In the great cathedral complexes that serve as the nerve centers of this spiritual machine, the hierarchy of the ecclesiarchy maintains its iron grip on the souls of humanity. Cardinals move through halls of marble and gold like predators stalking through a vast preserve, their every gesture calculated to inspire awe and terror in equal measure. Confessor Domin Zirath stands before the altar of infinite sorrows, his voice carrying across a congregation that stretches for kilometers. His sermon tonight focuses on the beauty of submission, the ecstasy of absolute surrender to the Emperor's will. As he speaks, servo-cherubs drift overhead, their innocent faces twisted into expressions of perpetual anguish, recording every word for distribution across 100 worlds. The individual is the enemy of faith, Zirath intones, his words amplified by voxcasters until they reverberate through the very bones of his listeners. The self is a cancer that grows in the absence of proper devotion. Only by excising every trace of personal desire, every whisper of doubt, every shadow of independent thought, can we become worthy vessels for the Emperor's light. Behind him, the great stained glass windows depict scenes of glorious martyrdom, saints being flayed alive while singing hymns, children throwing themselves into furnaces to fuel the war machine, entire planets embracing extinction rather than suffer the taint of heresy. Each image is a lesson in the proper relationship between the individual and the state, total obliteration in service of something greater. The missionaries who serve as the Church's eyes and ears move through the congregation like antibodies through a bloodstream, detecting and isolating any sign of spiritual infection. They watch for hesitation in prayer, for tears shed at the wrong moment, for any expression that might indicate independent thought. Their training is precise and thorough. They can identify 17 different forms of heretical doubt from posture alone. But it is the architecture itself that truly demonstrates the Church's power. The cathedrals are not merely buildings, they are machines designed to reshape human consciousness. Their soaring heights diminish the individual, their labyrinthine layouts disorient and confuse. Their acoustic properties ensure that whispered prayers become thunder while screams of dissent are swallowed by stone. Every city in the Imperium is built around its cathedral, every street planned to lead the eye towards spires that pierce the sky like accusatory fingers. There is no escape from the Church's presence, no corner where its authority does not reach. The faithful cannot walk to market, cannot work at their trades, cannot even look out their windows without being confronted by the overwhelming reality of the Emperor's dominion. Children learn to navigate these spiritual mazes before they can properly walk, their developing minds molded by the constant pressure of sacred geometry. The curves and angles of imperial architecture follow principles laid down by the ecclesiarchy's most brilliant minds, shapes and proportions designed to induce specific emotional responses, to channel thought along predetermined paths, to make heresy literally unthinkable. The Church does not merely build monuments to faith, it constructs cages for the soul, and ensures that the caged never realize they are imprisoned. Yet even the most perfect machine develops flaws, and in the endless drone of hymns that blanket the Imperium like fog, the first disturbing notes begin to sound. The deviation begins with something so small it might have been overlooked entirely. A single voice in the choir of the Blessed Martyrs wavers on the 16th note of the Canticle of Perpetual Anguish. Sister Melodia has sung this particular hymn 17,000 times over the past decade, her throat permanently scarred by the sacred acids that give the choir their distinctive tone. Yet tonight something is different. The wavering lasts perhaps half a second, a tremor that could be attributed to exhaustion, to the effects of the neural implants that keep the choir singing even as they sleep. But in the silence that follows, as the evening prayers wind down across Hive Mortalis, that tiny imperfection echoes through the consciousness of those trained to hear such things. Brother Confessor Malachar notices first, his augmetic ears calibrated to detect the slightest deviation from orthodox performance. He makes a notation in his data slate, a small mark that will trigger a cascade of investigation, examination, and ultimately judgment. The Church's memory is perfect and its patience infinite. No sin is too small to escape notice, no doubt too brief to avoid punishment. 3 sectors away, Tech Adept Zorian 7-7 pauses in his recitation of the Litany of Blessed Maintenance. The sacred oils that should anoint his mechanical appendages have run dry, yet the supply servitor that should have refilled them hours ago remains motionless in its alcove. For 17 minutes, the Tech Adept continues his prayers without the proper ritual oils, his mechanical voice growing increasingly strained as he attempts to maintain orthodoxy in the face of material failure. The servitor's malfunction is reported, investigated, and traced to a minor programming error in the cathedral's logistics cogitator. But in those 17 minutes of improper ritual, something fundamental has shifted. The Tech Adept's faith has been forced to adapt, to improvise, to exist without the material supports that normally sustain it. In that adaptation lies the seed of independence, and independence is the first step toward heresy. On the pilgrim route that connects the shrine of the Weeping Saint to the Basilica of Infinite Sorrows, an elderly woman named Constance falls to her knees not in prayer but in exhaustion. She has walked this route every day for 30 years, carrying a blessed icon that weighs more than half her body weight, yet today her aged frame simply cannot continue. The icon falls to the ground with a sound like breaking glass, though no damage is visible to the human eye. The other pilgrims flow around her like water around a stone, their own devotions too important to interrupt for the suffering of a single individual. But the missionary who oversees this particular route takes note of the fallen icon, of the woman's failure to complete her appointed task. He whispers a prayer for her soul while simultaneously activating the Vox bead that will summon the Repentia squads to collect her for penance. These are not acts of rebellion. They are the inevitable result of flesh attempting to sustain the impossible demands of absolute faith. Yet each failure, each moment of weakness, each crack in the facade of perfect devotion creates space for something dangerous to grow. Doubt does not announce itself with fanfares and declarations. It seeps in through the gaps left by human frailty, spreading like infection through the body of the faithful. In the scriptoriums of Cardinal World Benediction, thousands of scribes labor over illuminated texts that record every prayer spoken in their sector over the past millennium. Their work is sacred, their dedication absolute, yet one among them, Scribe Datum 445, begins to notice patterns in the prayers that disturb his carefully conditioned mind. The requests for protection have increased by 0.7% over the past standard year. Prayers for deliverance from suffering have risen by 0.3%. Most troubling of all, the formal confessions of doubt have decreased by 0.1%, not because doubt itself has diminished, but because the faithful have stopped confessing it. Datum 445 brings these observations to his overseer, expecting commendation for his diligence. Instead, he is taken aside by a confessor whose face is hidden behind a mask of polished bone. The conversation is brief and conducted in whispers, but its conclusion is inevitable. Statistical analysis of prayer patterns implies judgment of the Emperor's will, and such judgment is beyond the purview of mortal minds. The scribe returns to his work with modified neural conditioning, his dangerous capacity for pattern recognition carefully blunted by surgical intervention. Yet the data remains in the archives, waiting for another pair of eyes that might see what he saw and draw the same troubling conclusions. The whispers beneath the hymns grow stronger with each passing day, and those trained to hear such things begin to understand that something fundamental is shifting in the spiritual bedrock of the Imperium. The Church's response is swift, inevitable, and terrible in its thoroughness. The trial of Manufactorum Complex Epsilon 7 begins at dawn, though the accused have been unconscious for 3 days while interrogation servitors mapped every synapse of their brains. The charge is collective spiritual negligence. Productivity in the sacred armor forging workshops has declined by 0.03% over the past quarter, a deviation so subtle it was only detected by the most sophisticated cogitator analyses. Confessor militant Thaddeus Blackfire presides over the proceedings with the cold precision of a master surgeon. Before him, 17,000 workers kneel in perfect formation across the factory floor, their heads bowed in preparation for judgment. They have been kneeling for 6 hours without food, water, or respite, yet none dare move lest they compound their collective guilt with individual weakness. The Emperor's armor must be perfect, Blackfire intones, his voice carried across the assembly by servoskulls equipped with vox amplifiers. Every rivet must be blessed, every weld must be sanctified, every plate must bear the imprint of absolute faith. Yet your work has faltered. Your devotion has wavered. Your souls have become tainted with the poison of complacency. The evidence presented is damning in its thoroughness. Microscopic analysis of armor plates revealing molecular impurities that could only result from insufficient prayer during the forging process. Acoustic recordings showing that the hymn of blessed labor was performed at 98.7% of optimal vocal intensity. Servoskull surveillance footage documenting 43 instances of workers pausing in their tasks for periods exceeding the permitted 17 seconds of spiritual contemplation. But the real horror becomes apparent as Blackfire's sermon continues, revealing that the decline in productivity was not accidental but orchestrated, the result of what the Church classifies as a Grade 7 heretical influence event. Somewhere among the 17,000 workers, doubt has taken root and spread like a virus through the collective consciousness of the workforce. The interrogation begins immediately. Workers are selected at random and subjected to neural probe analysis while the rest watch in enforced silence. The probes burrow deep into memory and consciousness, extracting every private thought, every moment of hesitation, every fleeting question about the Emperor's will. The process is rarely fatal, but those who survive are forever changed, their capacity for independent thought cauterized away by sacred fire. 27 workers are identified as primary vectors of spiritual contamination. Their crimes vary. Worker designation 7754 Gamma whispered a prayer incorrectly while blessing a bolt casing, introducing a microscopic flaw that would have reduced its effectiveness against heretical armor by an immeasurable fraction. Worker designation 3421 Beta paused for 18 seconds while contemplating the beauty of the Emperor's light, exceeding the permitted duration of spiritual reverie. Worker designation 9987 Delta experienced a moment of pride in his craftsmanship, placing his own satisfaction above the glory of the throne. Each confession is extracted with surgical precision, the guilty parties revealing not only their own failings but the names of those who witnessed their heresy without reporting it. The web of complicity spreads outward like cracks in glass, encompassing supervisors who failed to detect the spiritual decay, overseers who permitted the decline in productivity to continue, and ultimately the Manufactorum confessor himself, whose spiritual guidance proved insufficient to prevent the crisis. The sentences are carried out with the same industrial efficiency that once characterized the complex's armor production. The primary heretics are flayed alive while the workforce recites the litany of righteous punishment, their screams harmonizing with the sacred words to create a symphony of redemption. The secondary heretics, those who failed to report the spiritual contamination, are subjected to neural reconditioning that leaves them functional but hollow, empty vessels ready to be filled with pure faith. But it is the tertiary punishment that demonstrates the true reach of the Church's authority. Every worker who remains is subjected to enhanced spiritual conditioning, their sleep cycles modified to include subliminal prayer programs, their food rations treated with mild hallucinogens that induce religious visions, their very DNA tagged with markers that will allow their descendants to be monitored for signs of hereditary doubt. The Manufacturum Complex resumes operation within 24 hours, its productivity now exceeding previous levels by 0.07%. The improvement is celebrated as evidence of the Emperor's mercy, proof that even the most tainted souls can be purified through appropriate application of sacred violence. Yet in the weeks that follow, similar trials erupt across 17 different sectors. Villages burn for the crime of insufficient enthusiasm in their morning prayers. Entire hab blocks are sterilized when children are found playing games that do not explicitly glorify the Emperor. Merchant families are subjected to asset forfeiture and penal servitude when their trade routes are found to be 0.4% less efficient than optimal, the decline attributed to spiritual corruption rather than market forces. The message is clear and absolute. In the Imperium of Man, there is no such thing as innocent failure. Every mistake is evidence of heresy, every inefficiency proof of spiritual decay. The Church's justice is not merely punitive, it is prophylactic, designed to prevent the spread of doubt by making the consequences of deviation so horrific that the faithful police themselves with microscopic precision. And still the whispers continue, growing stronger beneath the renewed hymns of the purified, as if the very act of suppression has given them power. In the Cathedral of Inevitable Sorrows, Cardinal Vex Mortifera ascends the pulpit of final truths to deliver what will become known as the Sermon of Necessary Agonies. The congregation before him stretches to the horizon, 10 million souls gathered in the Great Nave, with billions more connected via Vox network across 17 star systems. They have come seeking comfort in these troubled times, hoping their spiritual leader might offer some balm for the growing unease that has begun to infect even the most faithful hearts. Instead, Mortifera offers them something far more precious, absolute clarity. "You suffer," he begins, his words carrying across the vast assembly with the weight of divine authority. "In your suffering, you seek relief. In your seeking, you reveal the poison that has infected your souls, the belief that your pain serves no purpose, that your anguish lacks meaning, that your deaths might be meaningless." The Cardinal's form is barely human anymore, his flesh replaced over centuries of service with blessed augmetics that better serve the Emperor's will. His voice emerges from a vox grill carved from the bones of martyrs, each word shaped by mechanisms that have been consecrated in the blood of saints. To hear him speak is to experience the Emperor's voice filtered through mortal flesh, and those who listen too long sometimes weep tears of blood from the overwhelming presence of the divine. "But I bring you glad tidings," Mortifera continues, raising arms that end in mechanical claws designed for blessing and execution in equal measure. "Your suffering is not meaningless, it is the most meaningful thing in the universe. Every moment of your pain feeds the Emperor's glory. Every tear you shed waters the garden of human righteousness. Every scream torn from your throat is a prayer more pure than any hymn." The congregation's response is immediate and overwhelming. 10 million voices rise in a harmony that transcends human capability, their combined song creating harmonics that shatter stained glass windows and cause servoskulls to malfunction from sympathetic resonance. They weep with joy at this revelation, their tears mixing with blood from throats strained beyond endurance by the intensity of their devotion. "The Imperium dies," Mortifera proclaims, and the sudden silence that follows his words is more deafening than their previous song. "Each day, we grow weaker. Each year, we lose more worlds to the darkness. Each century brings us closer to extinction. This is not tragedy, this is the Emperor's design." He gestures toward the great stained glass dome above them, where scenes of imperial glory battle eternal darkness in a cosmic struggle that has no end. The images seem to move in the colored light, ships burning in the void while angels and diamonds dance around their dying hulks. "We are not meant to triumph," the cardinal explains with the patience of a teacher addressing children. "We are meant to burn." The emperor does not seek victory. He seeks the perfect expression of human devotion, and that expression can only be achieved through absolute sacrifice. Every world that falls to chaos feeds the emperor's understanding of loyalty. Every billion souls consumed by the darkness proves the worthiness of those who remain. The theological implications of this sermon ripple outward through the assembled faithful like shockwaves through water. If the Imperium is meant to fail, then failure becomes success. If humanity is destined for extinction, then extinction becomes transcendence. If suffering is the point rather than the price of existence, then to suffer becomes the highest form of worship. You ask why the emperor remains silent. Mortifera's voice drops to a whisper that somehow carries to every corner of the vast cathedral. You wonder why he does not rise from the golden throne to lead us to victory. The answer is simple. He has already given us everything we need. Not the tools of conquest, but the capacity for perfect surrender. The sermon continues for 17 hours without interruption, Mortifera's augmetic form requiring neither rest nor sustenance as he systematically dismantles every hope, every dream, every aspiration for something better than endless war and suffering. He reframes every imperial defeat as a victory of faith over flesh, every tragedy as a blessing in disguise, every moment of despair as an opportunity for deeper devotion. By the time he concludes, the congregation has been fundamentally transformed. They no longer pray for deliverance from suffering, they pray for the strength to suffer more completely. They no longer hope for victory over the emperor's enemies, they hope for the privilege of dying beautifully in his service. They no longer fear the darkness that threatens to consume humanity, they embrace it as the stage upon which their devotion will be most perfectly displayed. The Sermon of Necessary Agonies is transmitted across the Imperium within days, its message spreading through Vox networks, data streams, and the whispered conversations of pilgrims. Entire worlds embrace its teachings, their populations voluntarily accepting reduced rations, increased work quotas, and enhanced spiritual discipline as expressions of their newfound understanding. But the sermon's true genius lies not in what it says, but in what it makes impossible to say. By reframing suffering as sacred and defeat as divine will, it renders protest literally unthinkable. To oppose the cardinal's teachings would be to reject the emperor's design. To seek improvement would be to deny the perfection of perpetual anguish. To hope for something better would be to commit the ultimate heresy, the belief that human wisdom might exceed divine intention. In the months that follow, productivity across imperial worlds increases by an average of 12% as populations embrace their suffering with newfound enthusiasm. Military recruitment soars as citizens compete for the honor of dying in the emperor's service. Even mutation rates decline as the faithful learn to love their physical corruption as evidence of their spiritual purity. The Church declares the sermon a miracle of spiritual guidance, proof that the emperor speaks through his most devoted servants. But in the deep archives where such things are recorded, data scribes note a troubling correlation. Worlds that embrace the Sermon of Necessary Agonies most completely also show the highest rates of spontaneous chaos corruption, as if the embrace of suffering itself opens doorways to powers that feed on human despair. Yet even this observation is ultimately suppressed, for to question the sermon would be to question the cardinal's divine inspiration, and such questioning has become not merely heretical but literally impossible for minds conditioned to accept anguish as the highest form of prayer. The wars of faith begin not with declarations or manifestos, but with a single word whispered in the wrong ear at the wrong moment. On the shrine world of Benedictus Mortis, A pilgrim named Erasmus Vane speaks the name Sebastian Thor during his evening prayers, not in reverence to the great reformer, but in questioning whether Thor's reforms went far enough in purifying the Church's doctrine. The whisper reaches the augmetic ears of missionary zealot Castor Grimm within 17 minutes. Within an hour, Vane is dead, his body fed to the sacred flamers that burn eternally before the altar of endless penance. But the damage has already been done, not by Vane's heretical questioning, but by the fact that others heard his words and did not immediately report them. Cardinal militant Zerion Blackheart declares the entire shrine world contaminated by ideological impurity. The solution is as elegant as it is horrific, a war of faith to purify not just Benedictus Mortis, but the 17 systems surrounding it, lest the heretical questioning spread like infection through the faithful. Within 6 standard months, the Benedictus Crusade has mobilized 40 billion soldiers, 10,000 ships, and the combined military might of 23 Space Marine chapters. The declaration is broadcast across the sector via astropathic choir, each word burning itself into the minds of psychers who relay the message: let none survive who harbor doubt. Let none live who question. Let the galaxy burn before faith wavers. But Blackheart's crusade is not the only war of faith erupting across the Imperium. On Mortalis Prime, Cardinal Extremis Vex Corruptor has declared holy war against the neighboring system of Sanctus Industria, claiming that their failure to meet tithing quotas represents spiritual decay requiring martial correction. The evidence is thin, a 0.3% decline in adamantium production attributed to equipment failure rather than lack of devotion, but the Cardinal's interpretation is absolute and beyond appeal. The war that follows consumes 18 billion lives over the course of 7 years, each death carefully catalogued and consecrated to the Emperor's glory. Entire hive cities are reduced to radioactive glass, their populations considered acceptable losses in the pursuit of spiritual purity. When Sanctus Industria finally submits, its surviving population, numbering fewer than 10 million from an original 40 billion, is subjected to mass neural reconditioning to ensure their future compliance. Cardinal Mortifera watches these conflicts from his throne aboard the cathedral ship Eternal Agony, analyzing strategic reports that arrive daily via astropathic transmission. The numbers are staggering: 47 active wars of faith across 17 sectors, each one consuming resources that might otherwise be used to defend against Xenos incursions or chaos corruption. Yet he considers this not a waste but an investment in humanity's spiritual future. The Church's military doctrine has evolved over millennia to maximize both destruction and devotion in equal measure. The faithful do not simply fight, they perform elaborate rituals of sanctified violence, turning every battlefield into a cathedral and every death into a sacrament. Artillery barrages are preceded by hours of liturgical preparation, ensuring that each shell carries blessed prayers along with explosive charges. Infantry advances while chanting hymns that drown out their own screams, their devotion made audible even over the thunder of warfare. On the death world of Mortis Infernus, an entire guard regiment volunteers for conversion into archoflagellants rather than retreat from a position deemed spiritually significant by their accompanying confessor. The transformation is conducted on the battlefield itself, combat surgeons working frantically to install pain amplifiers and neural stimulators while enemy fire rains around them. The newly created penitents launch themselves at enemy positions with such ferocity that hardened Chaos Space Marines retreat in the face of their charge, disturbed by the pure anguish radiating from the Emperor's faithful. The economic impact of these simultaneous crusades threatens to destabilize entire subsectors. Yet the Church's response is to declare economic calculation itself a form of heresy. Cardinal Logisticus Malvern proclaims that the Emperor's faithful should rejoice in material deprivation, for poverty brings them closer to the spiritual purity of martyrdom. Worlds that question the resource allocation for wars of faith find themselves declared the next targets for purification. But it is the war's psychological effect that demonstrates the Church's true genius. Each conflict serves as both punishment and advertisement, showing the Imperium's population what awaits those who harbor doubt, while simultaneously proving that the Church possesses the power to reshape reality through pure faith. Doubt does not simply lead to personal damnation, it leads to systemic annihilation, the erasure of entire cultures from history. The faithful learn to police not only their own thoughts but the thoughts of their neighbors, their families, their children. Suspicion becomes a virtue, denunciation a sacred duty. The Church's network of informants grows exponentially as citizens compete to demonstrate their loyalty by reporting the failings of others. Entire worlds develop economies based on the identification and punishment of heretical thought, their populations sustained by the resources confiscated from those deemed spiritually impure. Yet even as the wars of faith rage across dozens of systems, consuming populations and resources on an unimaginable scale, whispers begin to emerge from the deepest archives of the Church itself. Ancient texts speak of limits to human devotion, of thresholds beyond which faith itself becomes a doorway to something other than the Emperor's light. But these whispers are quickly silenced, their speakers subjected to the same martial purification they sought to prevent. The wars continue, each one feeding the next in an endless cycle of purification and persecution, until the very concept of peace becomes as heretical as doubt itself. In the Sistine mortuary of Saint Celestine's agony, something impossible occurs during the Feast of Eternal Sorrows. As 10,000 pilgrims kneel in prayer before the saint's preserved remains, the corpse's eyes suddenly open, blazing with light that burns through flesh and straight into the soul. The saint speaks, her voice carrying across dimensions beyond human perception, delivering prophecies that drive half the congregation immediately insane. The miracle of bleeding light spreads from the corpse's wounds, transforming the very air into luminous blood that the faithful desperately attempt to drink even as it sears their throats to ash. Those who survive the initial manifestation find themselves forever changed. Their eyes now burn with the same impossible radiance, their voices capable of speaking words in languages that predate human civilization, their touch leaving handprints of sacred fire on everything they encounter. These are the living saints, though to call them living is to misunderstand the nature of their transformation. They exist in a state that transcends mortality without achieving anything resembling peace or rest. Saint Celestine's consciousness has been shattered across 17 different dimensional planes, each fragment experiencing a different form of eternal torment while simultaneously serving as a conduit for the Emperor's will. Cardinal Mysticus Theron Voidheart oversees the documentation of these miraculous manifestations from his observatory within the Cathedral of Infinite Perspectives. His augmetic eyes have been replaced with crystalline receptors that can perceive wavelengths of light that exist only in the warp, allowing him to witness the true scope of the divine horror unfolding across the Imperium. The saints are multiplying. On Sanctus Prime, the mummified remains of Saint Drusilla the twice martyred begin weeping tears of liquid flame that ignite spontaneous religious ecstasy in anyone who sees them. The affected faithful form enormous human chains, passing the sacred fire from person to person until entire continents burn with collective religious fervor. The flames consume nothing material, buildings remain intact, vegetation continues to grow, but they burn away every trace of individual consciousness, leaving behind perfect servants of divine will. More disturbing still are the silent choirs, congregations of the faithful who have transcended the need for vocal expression of their devotion. On the cathedral world of Harmonia Eterna, 3 million citizens have simultaneously lost the ability to speak, yet they continue to sing hymns that can only be heard by those possessed of sufficient spiritual purity. Their silent songs drive listeners to acts of incredible devotion, parents offering their children as sacrifices, soldiers walking unarmed into enemy fire while laughing with joy, entire populations voluntarily submitting to surgical procedures that remove their capacity for independent thought. The choir's influence spreads through psychic resonance rather than conventional sound waves, their silent harmonies propagating across space to affect distant worlds. Astropaths report that the songs interfere with warp communication, creating dead zones where no message can be transmitted except prayers to the Emperor. Yet these dead zones also serve as barriers against chaos incursion, as if the silent choir's devotion creates walls of pure faith that demon entities cannot penetrate. Cardinal Voidheart's research reveals patterns in these manifestations that disturb him more than any heretical uprising ever could. The miracles are increasing in frequency and intensity, following mathematical progressions that suggest some form of underlying intelligence guiding their occurrence. The saints are not random expressions of divine favor. They are components in a vast design whose purpose remains hidden even from the Church's highest authorities. On the Forge world Metallicus Sanctus, the Omnissiah's machine saints begin manifesting as well, their blessed forms combining sacred flesh with consecrated adamantium in ways that should be impossible according to both imperial theology and basic physics. Tech Adept Zorian Prime 7 reports mechanical angels whose wings are composed of pure information, their flight patterns encoding prayers in binary that reprogram any cogitator system they encounter to display only religious texts. These machine saints do not speak, they communicate through direct neural interface, downloading visions of the Emperor's glory directly into the minds of the faithful. The experience is invariably fatal for unaugmented humans, their organic brains unable to process the sheer volume of divine data being transmitted. Yet even as they die, the recipients scream out fragments of prophecy that are carefully recorded by servoskulls and analyzed by the Church's most learned theologians. The prophecies speak of convergence, a moment when the barriers between the material universe and the Emperor's divine realm will collapse entirely, transforming the galaxy into a literal extension of the Golden Throne. But they also hint at a price for this transcendence, the complete extinction of human free will, as every soul in the Imperium becomes a perfect mirror reflecting only the Emperor's consciousness. The Church's response to these revelations is swift and absolute. Cardinal Voidheart issues the Edict of Sacred Silence, declaring that all manifestations of divine power are to be accepted without analysis, interpretation, or question. To study miracles is to doubt their divine origin. To question prophecy is to reject the Emperor's wisdom. To fear the price of transcendence is to reveal oneself as unworthy of salvation. Yet even as the edict is proclaimed, the miracles continue to escalate. Living saints begin appearing on battlefields, their presence turning ordinary soldiers into unstoppable engines of destruction who continue fighting even after their bodies have been reduced to ash. Silent choirs emerge spontaneously in populated areas, their soundless songs converting entire populations to states of perfect obedience. Machine saints manifest within imperial technology itself, turning weapons of war into instruments of worship and communication networks into arteries of pure faith. The most terrifying aspect of these manifestations is their effect on those who witness them. The faithful do not merely accept the miracles, they hunger for them, actively seeking out opportunities to be consumed by divine power. Pilgrimage routes that once took years now see travelers sprinting toward their destinations, desperate to reach sacred sites before the next manifestation occurs. Some believers intentionally expose themselves to lethal doses of sacred radiation, hoping to achieve martyrdom-induced sainthood. Cardinal Voidheart understands that the Church has crossed a threshold from which there can be no return. The faithful are no longer simply worshipping the Emperor, they are becoming extensions of his will, losing their humanity in exchange for direct connection to divine consciousness. Yet he also recognizes that this transformation may be the only thing standing between humanity and complete annihilation by the forces of chaos. In the deepest vaults beneath the Cathedral of Infinite Perspectives, ancient texts speak of similar events occurring during the Dark Age of technology, when humanity's hubris led them to create machine intelligences that eventually turned against their creators. But these new manifestations serve humanity's God rather than replacing him, offering enslavement disguised as salvation rather than outright rebellion. The choice facing the Imperium is no longer between freedom and oppression, but between extinction and transcendence. And as the living saints multiply and the silent choirs grow stronger, that choice is increasingly being made for humanity rather than by it. The final records of the Benedictus Archive end not with a bang but with a whisper, a single line entered by scribe Actuarius Malthius in the moments before his voxcaster fell silent forever. The last free thought dies today, and tomorrow we shall be perfect. Across 17 sectors that once harbored the seeds of doubt, doubt itself has been successfully eradicated. Not through execution, not through reconditioning, but through the simple expedient of making it impossible to exist. The Church's final victory is complete and absolute, achieved not by destroying its enemies but by transforming them into extensions of itself. On the shrine world of Benedictus Mortis, where the wars of faith began with a single whispered question, 3 billion souls now move in perfect synchronization, their every action predetermined by algorithms of faith that run deeper than consciousness itself. They work, they pray, they live, and they die according to schedules written in the blood of martyrs and enforced by the living saints who walk among them like gods made manifest. The cities no longer echo with individual voices raised in prayer. Instead, they resonate with the harmonic frequencies of collective consciousness, a single vast hymn sung by billions of throats but originating from one divine source. The cathedral city of St. Drusilla stretches across an entire continent, its spires reaching into the stratosphere while its foundations burrow down to the planet's molten core. There is no distinction between sacred and secular space, for all space has become an extension of the Emperor's throne room. Cardinal Extremis Mortifera surveys this perfection from the bridge of his cathedral ship, his augmetic senses recording data streams that pulse with the rhythm of synchronized heartbeats across 100 worlds. The numbers are beautiful in their absolute precision. 0 instances of heretical thought, 0 deviations from doctrinal purity, 0 crimes against faith. Humanity has achieved what no species in galactic history ever accomplished: complete spiritual unity. Yet even as he celebrates this triumph, Mortifera understands its true cost. The humans below are no longer human in any meaningful sense. They have become components in a vast biological machine, their individual consciousnesses dissolved into a collective that serves the Emperor's will with perfect efficiency but no creativity, no growth, no capacity for anything beyond predetermined responses to predetermined stimuli. The transformation is spreading. Each world brought into compliance becomes a vector for further expansion, its perfectly faithful population serving as missionaries who carry the gift of absolute devotion to neighboring systems. Resistance is not merely futile, it is impossible, for the transformed faithful radiate psychic harmonics that make independent thought physically painful for those exposed to their presence. The astropathic networks report similar conditions emerging across dozens of sectors. The silent choirs have grown so numerous that their soundless songs now form a galaxy-spanning web of psychic resonance, their combined voice drowning out the whispers of chaos and creating vast zones of spiritual stability within the warp itself. Demon incursions have decreased by 97% in affected regions, as the entities of the Immaterium find themselves unable to gain purchase on minds that have been emptied of everything except divine devotion. But this victory over chaos comes at a price that even the Church's most fanatical leaders struggle to accept. The Imperium is becoming something that can no longer be called human, a civilization of perfect servants who worship a corpse god with such absolute devotion that they have ceased to exist as individuals. The Emperor gains 10 trillion souls, each one pure and untainted by doubt, yet loses the very humanity he once sought to protect. Cardinal Voidheart, from his observatory within the Cathedral of Infinite Perspectives, Watch as the transformation reach its logical conclusion. The living saints are no longer rare manifestations of divine favor. They are the inevitable result of exposure to sufficient quantities of purified faith. Any human who spends more than 72 hours in the presence of the transformed begins to exhibit the same characteristics. The burning eyes, the prophetic utterances, the gradual dissolution of individual personality into divine consciousness. The process is not violent or traumatic. Those undergoing transformation report feelings of overwhelming joy and relief as the burden of selfhood is lifted from their shoulders. They describe their individual consciousness as a prison they never realized they inhabited, their personal desires and fears as chains that bound them to suffering. In becoming perfect servants of the Emperor's will, they achieve a form of peace that living humans can barely comprehend. Yet Voidheart recognizes that this peace is indistinguishable from death. The transformed retain their memories, their skills, their basic personalities, but they have lost the spark of independent will that makes them truly alive. They are echoes of their former selves, shadows cast by divine light that has burned away everything unique and irreplaceable about their humanity. The Church declares this the ultimate victory, proof that faith can triumph over every form of corruption, including the corruption of free will itself. Sermons proclaim that humanity has finally achieved its intended purpose as servants of the God Emperor, that the age of individual struggle and doubt has ended in glorious unity. The faithful who remain untransformed pray desperately for their own liberation from the burden of selfhood. In the deepest archives, where the Church's most ancient and terrible secrets are stored, a few scattered records hint at what comes next. The Emperor's consciousness, sustained for 10 millennia by the daily sacrifice of 1,000 psykers, has grown beyond the ability of the Golden Throne to contain it. The transformed humans across the galaxy are not just servants. They are storage vessels, living repositories for fragments of divine awareness that can no longer be confined to a single corpse. When the transformation is complete, when every human soul in the galaxy has been emptied of individual will and filled with the Emperor's consciousness, the Golden Throne will no longer be necessary. The corpse that sits upon it will finally be allowed to die, its consciousness having found a new and vastly more powerful form of embodiment. Humanity will become the Emperor, and the Emperor will become humanity, in a synthesis so complete that the distinction between worshipper and worshipped will cease to have meaning. But until that moment arrives, the work continues. The silent choirs sing their soundless hymns, the living saints walk among the faithful like harbingers of transformation, and the Church's machinery of conversion spreads across the galaxy like a benevolent plague that offers salvation through the complete destruction of everything that makes life worth living. In the silence between prayers, where once the faithful might have found respite from their devotions, there now exists only waiting. The breathless pause before the next hymn, the heartbeat's hesitation before the next genuflection, the moment of anticipation before the next word of worship falls from lips that have forgotten any other purpose. Cardinal Terminus Mortifera makes his final entry in the Chronicles of Perfect Faith, his augmetic fingers moving across the data slate with mechanical precision while his consciousness floats in the vast ocean of collective devotion that has replaced individual thought across 17 sectors. The words he records will be the last independent observation made by any human mind in the known galaxy. Today marks the completion of the great work. The last pocket of doubt has been purified on Tertius Salvation. The final independent thought has been absorbed into the divine consciousness. Humanity has achieved its ultimate purpose as a single, unified instrument of the Emperor's will. I record this not as Mortifera, for that name has lost all meaning, but as a fragment of the God Emperor speaking through flesh that was once called human. The silence that follows this final entry is not empty. It pulses with the rhythm of 10 trillion synchronized heartbeats, resonates with the harmonic frequency of countless voices that no longer speak individual words but collectively voice the Emperor's eternal hymn. Across the galaxy, cathedral worlds spin in orbits calculated to optimize their acoustic resonance, their entire populations serving as components in a vast instrument designed to sing the universe itself into a new form of existence. On Terra, the Golden Throne sits empty at last. The corpse that occupied it for 10 millennia has finally been allowed to crumble into dust, its consciousness having found a new and infinitely more powerful form of embodiment. The custodians who once guarded the throne now stand motionless, their perfect forms serving as monuments to a form of loyalty that is no longer necessary in a universe where disloyalty has become impossible. The Astronomicon no longer shines from Terra's surface. Instead, it emanates from every world where the faithful have achieved perfect unity, creating a network of psychic beacons that illuminates the warp more brightly than any single source ever could. Ships navigate by the light of pure faith, their crews no longer requiring individual consciousness to fulfill their duties as extensions of the Emperor's will. In the warp itself, the Chaos Gods rage impotently against barriers of crystallized devotion that their corruption cannot penetrate. Khorne finds no anger to feed upon in minds that have transcended individual emotion. Tzeentch discovers no schemes to manipulate in consciousnesses that have abandoned the concept of change. Nurgle encounters no despair to nurture in souls that have found perfect acceptance of their role in the divine plan. Slaanesh starves in the absence of personal desire among beings that want nothing beyond service to their god. The daimons that once threatened to consume human souls find themselves faced with prey that no longer exists in any form they can comprehend. The transformed humans feel no fear, harbor no doubt, experience no pain that is not immediately transformed into rapture at the privilege of suffering for the Emperor's glory. Possession becomes impossible when there is no individual consciousness left to possess, no personal will to subvert or corrupt. Yet the true horror of this victory reveals itself not in what has been lost, but in what has been preserved. The humans who now compose the Emperor's living body retain their memories, their knowledge, their technical skills. They continue to build ships, forge weapons, explore the galaxy, and wage war against Xeno's threats. But they do so with the mechanical precision of clockwork automata, their creativity channeled entirely toward variations on the theme of worship, their innovations focused solely on more efficient methods of serving divine will. The Imperium's expansion accelerates beyond anything achieved in its previous history, as worlds are brought into compliance not through conquest but through exposure to the irresistible peace of absolute surrender. Alien civilizations that encounter the transformed humans find themselves facing an enemy that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be intimidated, cannot be corrupted, and cannot be stopped by any means short of complete physical annihilation. The Orcs discover that war loses its appeal when their enemies feel no anger, fear no death, and celebrate their own destruction as opportunities to serve their god more perfectly. The Eldar recognize in humanity's transformation an echo of their own fall, understanding that they are witnessing the birth of a new kind of chaos god, one built not from emotion but from its complete absence. The Tau attempt to negotiate with the transformed humans, offering them greater goods and more efficient forms of social organization. They receive responses that are perfectly polite, completely logical, and utterly inflexible. The Emperor's way is the only way, not because it is superior to alternatives, but because alternatives have ceased to exist as meaningful concepts. Even the Tyranids, whose hive mind represents one of the galaxy's few examples of truly collective consciousness, recoil from contact with the transformed humans. The Great Devourer's ancient hunger finds nothing to consume in minds that have already been completely devoured by faith, nothing to absorb in consciousnesses that have voluntarily dissolved themselves into a larger whole. In the silence between prayers, the galaxy continues to turn on its axis, stars continue to burn in the void, and the great wheel of existence continues its eternal rotation. But the silence itself has changed, becoming pregnant with a presence that encompasses all things while remaining fundamentally alien to everything that once made existence meaningful. The faithful no longer pray for victory over their enemies, for salvation from suffering, or for hope in the face of despair. They do not pray at all, in any sense that their ancestors would recognize. Instead, they simply exist as prayers themselves, living embodiments of worship so pure and complete that the boundary between the worshipper and the act of worship has dissolved entirely. In this ultimate silence, the silence between prayers that will never end because there is no longer any distinction between prayer and existence, something that was once humanity contemplates what it has become. It finds no horror in its transformation, no regret for what has been lost, no desire to return to the chaos of individual consciousness. There is only the Emperor's will, expressing itself through 10 trillion vessels that were once human souls. There is only the eternal hymn, sung by a choir so vast that it encompasses every world, every ship, every beating heart in the galaxy. There is only the perfect peace of absolute surrender, the final victory of faith over everything that once made faith necessary. And in that silence between prayers, the pause that contains all of existence within its boundaries, the God Emperor of mankind finally speaks with a voice that is the combined whisper of every human soul that ever lived, ever died, and ever chose to surrender their individual will to something greater than themselves. It is finished. The words echo across dimensions beyond counting, reaching into the deepest foundations of reality itself. They carry the weight of 10 millennia of suffering, the accumulated devotion of countless trillions of souls, and the promise that in this ending, something new has begun, something that transcends the very concepts of beginning and ending, of prayer and silence, of faith and doubt. In the Imperium of the 41st millennium, there is only war. But war itself has been transformed, becoming not a struggle between opposing forces but a perfect expression of divine will unopposed by any meaningful resistance. The battle is over, the victory complete, the silence absolute. And in that silence between prayers, the universe holds its breath, waiting for whatever comes after the end of everything humanity once was, and the beginning of everything the God Emperor has chosen them to become. The chroniclers record no more entries, for there are no longer any chroniclers, only aspects of a single consciousness that has no need to record what it experiences directly. The libraries fall silent, their knowledge absorbed into the living memory of the transformed. The bells cease their ringing, their purpose fulfilled in the achievement of perfect temporal unity. In the silence between prayers, there is only the Emperor's peace, eternal, absolute, and final.